Welcome to the Rich Report, a podcast with news and information on the world of big data. Today, my guest is from Jaspersoft. We have Mike Boyorski. He's the Director of Product Marketing at the company. So, Mike, welcome to the show today.
Hey, thanks, Rich. Good to be here.
Well, thanks for coming on. I'm kind of curious about what you guys are up to, so I brought your slides up. Why don't we start with that, and we'll follow it with Q&A.
Sounds great. Great. So yeah, today we're going to talk about how to best align your big data analytics strategy by ideally starting at the end. So it's sort of a new approach. So why don't we get started by going on to the next slide. So the opportunity of big data is tremendous. Big data has presented huge opportunities for businesses because the variety and the velocity and the volume of data has decreased in cost. And a lot of this is thanks to the commoditization of hardware and software. And this has also increased the value of the data because since most, maybe not all, but most academics and stats geeks will confirm that more data is better when they're trying to analyze and predict what's going to happen. So given this, the possibilities for finding and validating new insights for greater efficiency or competitiveness has never been richer. Organizations today are competing on time and information in the 21st century. Everyone's being asked to respond faster, to do more with less. And you can do a lot of this using information. And the benefits can result in delivering a best-in-class service or maybe identifying new markets or products or other services. However, without the right direction and plan in place, this opportunity can lead to failure in the form of costs or a poorly designed solution. So let's move on to the next slide. What leads to the failure with big data? The breadth of the technologies in this market are significant. There's a lot to understand that can be overwhelming, particularly against a particular path for you and your organization. For example, Hadoop has become a very popular, very visible project to address your big data challenges. However, Hadoop isn't always the right tool for the job. And so this could result in added delays, added costs to your project. So it's really important to identify which tool is right for your particular problem. So before implementing a big data plan, do your research on the available data management tools out there. There are many, and it's not obvious. So we suggest checking out the 451 group, which is an industry analyst group who has a great report on big data, and that they categorize and explain the differences between a wide variety of offerings. And they've got some really good diagrams as well. So it's a really good primer to help you understand the various tools available. Forrester also offers a wide variety of insight around big data, and it also chronicles its expertise in their reports and various blog entries. So go ahead and start with that. If we move to the next slide, we can offer a little bit of advice on how to approach your big data project. First, you need to identify the problem. Big data is not one of those things where you want to try to figure out or introduce a big data problem. You should be already experiencing this problem in one way or another. It should be glaringly obvious that you have this challenge. And maybe you've tried to approach solving this problem using the tools that you have in-house today. And honestly, many of these tools were just not designed to address some of these challenges because of the scale and the size of the issue that you're facing. So once you have the problem defined, the next step is to identify the requirements to address this opportunity. And this includes a combination of course, looking at the various tools available. Many of them are software related. Some of them are hardware related, although if you do offer or consider the cloud, a lot of that hardware challenge or planning can be sort of abstracted away because that can be offloaded to somebody like a hosted service provider like Amazon. But the most important step is really identifying the skills of your team or the gap in skills in your team that are required to build and manage this type of solution. It really does require, in some cases, folks that have a blended experience of statistics, modeling, They are very, very strong in sort of their ability to analyze data. They also blend that with data management skills, the ability to move data around, query data using techniques that have been around in the industry for many years. So this is an important part to the overall puzzle, is identifying the proper skill set to address this problem. And then finally, you need to ask yourself, who within my organization or project needs to use this data? And how will those results be acted on? This is one of those age-old challenges in BI, is that a lot of times you come up with the results of data and there's no plan to act on it. And so therefore, you really need to follow through and figure out, if we find some insight, are we built or designed to be able to change or move on that new insight? So that's a really big step. So moving on, let's talk about how to answer these questions. You're going to need to identify a few things first. First, you're going to have to identify the user profiles of this overall solution. So that starts from, if you want to start from the front, around who wants access to the data, how will they use it, who needs it, how will you implement this technology, how are you going to maintain it. You really need to identify all the roles that are going to be responsible for this solution. Then you want to identify the specific or intended outcomes or the use cases for the data. So again, going back to my earlier comment on action, you need to kind of think about, again, if you're going to identify insight and new opportunities, how is your organization going to implement or act on those? In some cases, this insight may require a fast act to implement a solution or or address a particular problem. So time to value is very important in terms of identifying the appropriate skill set and resources. And then finally, there's the requirements for processing and using the data. And the requirements are typically more technical in nature, because you want to identify your the sort of service level agreements, if you will, around the data. How often do I need it? When do I need it? How stale can the data be, etc. So if we move on to the next slide, this is a slide that we'll spend a little bit of time on, because there's a lot to cover. There's a number of approaches that you can take when ultimately analyzing and working with big data. So let's start from the very left column. There's a use case defined, and then each use case has a particular latency associated to it. And latency in this context is, how long does it take for me to get the results of my question? And the next layer is the big data tool. So which technologies are used to enable from a data management perspective? The connectivity in this category is about, how am I accessing that data? Is it using the direct native interface of the tool, or am I using other tools that I already have in-house? And then finally, there's an architecture that's associated with each one. So if we look at the very top column, which is live exploration. Live exploration is really good for data analysts or even data scientists who have discovered an insight and they want to iteratively explore and share this with non-technical users for ongoing real-time analysis. And they want the fastest, most direct way to get to the data to identify this insight. So the big requirement here is speed. I want to get to my data quickly. I want the results as fast as possible. And once I find those results, I want to share that with other parts of the organization. And so this requires a low latent architecture so that you can identify with speed and efficiency. And so typically the tools that you want to look at are tools that can natively connect to your big data engines. So for example, if we look at Hadoop, Hadoop has an HBase sort of environment that's associated with it. This provides you really a direct access to the underlying data. There's no sort of interpretation layer, if you will. So this is a very quick, fast way to access your data. MongoDB also has a very similar approach in that you can directly access that data as swiftly as possible to get the results that you need. The next column, which we call direct batch reporting, is really geared for those who want summarized or pre-built daily reports based on predefined queries. So you already have a sense of what you're looking for. You've got a defined query already in place, and you are looking for those results on a sort of ongoing basis. Maybe it's predictable, maybe it's a couple times a day or once a week. This architecture is typically a little less sort of real time, if you will. So this is why we call the latency a medium level. So that means you may be getting your results on every couple times a day, or again, like I mentioned earlier, maybe a couple times a week. And this architecture can also take advantage of traditional tools. So tools that require your classic SQL-based query language are sufficient with this model, because what you're doing is you're using what would be considered sort of classic approaches to accessing these big data environments. So again, if we look at Hadoop as another example, they have a nice SQL interpretation layer called Hive. Hive is a great way to access Hadoop using your common SQL language. So you don't have to throw away those business intelligence tools or other tools that you're using to access your data. And so the technique is very comfortable and familiar. The downside is that there is latency. You increase the latency, so therefore if you need that access very, very quickly, it might not be the best approach for you. And then the final column is the indirect batch analysis. And this is really good for data analysts or operational managers who want to analyze their big data environment with historical trends. And so a lot of this is where we get into this mashing up of data between maybe a traditional analytic database and your unstructured or semi-structured big data environment. And this is a great way to also leverage your existing tools. So a lot of ETL can be used here, traditional BI front-end tools are available to you here. The only downside with this approach is that the latency is high, meaning it takes typically many, many hours, if not overnight, to get the results from your queries. So the benefits are, the advantages are, you can get some historical trend analysis, and that analysis may be more useful and more impactful for your decision. The downside is that you may have to take time to get those results. So if this is going to be associated with a real-time business process, then you may want to look at a different approach, something that's much more immediate. And the underlying architecture, as described there, again, leverages a lot of your existing BI architecture. So you're moving the data out of your big data engine into some sort of specialized mart or data mart, or merging that data with an existing data warehouse. And then you're what's sitting on top is a traditional BI platform. Maybe you use a NoLAP engine to aggregate your results, et cetera. But from then on, you're really using traditional methods. So finally, we'll wrap this up by talking about aligning your big data opportunity is about aligning it to the big data solution. So remember that these matchups are not readily apparent. You've got to do some digging. You've got to do some scoping. You've got to look around. A lot of the benefits of open source is that of the big data engines is that they are open source driven. So you can learn a lot by what's out there in the community. There's a lot of resources to learn about the different use cases that each engine and tool can enable. And you can also avoid spending a lot of money on license fees. Really learning about how some of these tools can enable your particular situation. If you want to learn a little bit more about reporting and analyzing big data, we recommend taking a look at jaspersoft.com/big data. There you can learn a little bit about the different techniques that I just talked about in terms of accessing and then socializing the results of your big data analysis. And we also have a nice tool called the Big Data Index. And this is an index that describes the various connectors that Jaspersoft provides for various big data engines. And it gives you a sense of which of these engines are the most popular. And it's also just kind of interesting to see the progression of the various tools that are available out there in the market and to see how they're maturing and improving in their popularity. So that's it, Rich. You've got any questions for me?
I sure do. Thanks for that, Mike. I'm curious about the genesis of this talk and this presentation. Were you finding that the customers you were talking to, that they're maybe their expectations weren't in alignment with what was really out there, or how did it start?
Yeah, I think, we're finding that a lot of customers are, they're confused in that they recognize the value, right? The value of big data and the use of that information is becoming apparent. The challenge is that there's so many options to choose from. So a lot are coming to us and coming to other vendors trying to figure out, how do I approach addressing this opportunity? And so for us, it's more a matter of trying to describe the total picture of how to approach this particular problem. And it's not easy. A lot of this has to be a little bit of trial and error. A lot of it has to be using your sort of the tools that you have accessible in this sort of very networked world to socialize your challenges and find out who is doing what. Really kind of use the community, if you will, that's behind a lot of this movement to learn what's the best approach for you. So it was really driven by a lot of questions that we're getting from customers because, frankly, they're confused and they need a little bit of help.
Sure, sure. So how does Jaspersoft differentiate itself in this crowded field?
Yeah, it's a great question. So, we have always been really focused on being an agnostic tool to data. We can connect. We've always been really good about connecting to traditional relational data. And historically, we've been a very embedded tool. So a lot of what occurs commonly is that a developer will build an application, and that application will store the data in a very sort of closed, custom way. And they want a tool that can basically connect to this data format that nobody else in the world has built. But they want to be able to share that data to their end customers and format it so that they can read it and use it. So Jaspersoft has been always good at connecting to a variety of systems of data. So when the big data sort of movement came online and became an area of popularity, it was just a natural extension for Jaspersoft to be able to connect, directly to those environments. So Jaspersoft's, real strength is in providing flexibility and options for folks to connect to their data. And this is one of the reasons why we want to explain the different techniques. There's the direct access, which we call live exploration, that really cuts all the middleman out of your question. You can get directly to the data and get the answers you need. But if you want something that's a little bit more traditional, you want to maybe look at traditional techniques like using SQL-based access or ETL-based tools, that's something that Jaspersoft also provides. So it's about giving options, and I think that's one of the strengths that Jaspersoft has, specifically around the big data arena, is our flexible architecture and ability to connect to a variety of different data in different ways.
So, kind of a wrap up question here, Mike. I met my first data scientist recently at the Structured Conference in New York, and she said that her title didn't really even exist 5 years ago, but now I see it all over my job board, right? People are looking for data scientists. Do you think that for the customers you talk to, are they at that stage yet where they need to have somebody in house who has that kind of special expertise?
Yeah, I do. I think there's also probably a few folks that have been doing this kind of, what I would consider a classic data analyst, are sort of scratching their heads saying, "Wait a minute, isn't that what I've been doing for the last 20 years? I've been using SAS and other analytic tools and stats tools to identify and predict insight against a variety of and a huge volume of data." I think the difference between the past 20 years of the data analyst and the next 20 years, which is now transforming into a data scientist role, is that these tools do require, the volume is coming in, and the variety is such that you really do have to have this blend of statistical modeling and data management. And I think the data management side was maybe not as much of a need as a skill set in the past as it is today. So I do think it's absolutely going to be a growing trend. There's a reason why everybody wants one, is because if you can combine the ability for somebody to quickly get access and insight to a very, very large and variety and volume of data, that's worth something to a lot of organizations. So I expect this to just be a continued trend.
Well, terrific. Well, Mike Boyarsky, I want to thank you once again for coming on the show today.
Yeah, appreciate it. Thanks, Rich.
You bet. You bet. Okay, folks, that's it for the Rich Report. Stay tuned for more news and information on the world of big data.